All right. Hello. Welcome back to Invisible Machines. We've got a great show today. We're having a conversation with Tim Wood, who is a senior UX manager and principal designer with Amazon Web Services, focusing on AI and AI platforms. Really, we kind of go all over in this one. We talk a bit about some of the more practical challenges that are right in front of us, as well as like some of the bigger challenges that are sort of looming in the dark on the horizon.
Yeah, and Tim's a real insider. You know, it's fascinating to kind of see what's happening, you know, in the engine room, so to speak.
Yeah, and he was at Kodak at a pivotal moment, kind of as things were moving, I think, from analog to digital. So he's sort of seen some of these things before. Although
he's seen disruption, and he knows what it feels like to be disrupted.
Surely,
and try to steer the ship in the right direction, you know, with the wind completely blowing against you. Yeah, so he's should be interesting.
Yeah, the sails are billowing, I suppose.
Let's talk to him.
All right, here we go. Let's get to Tim. All right, Tim, great to have you on the podcast. Rob and I, we were having this discussion as we kind of watched. I don't know if you've seen the video of Tesla's new robot, kind of like robot army.
Yeah.
Have you seen it? We have it queued up. We can play it for you. Yeah.
It's been in the media quite a bit. I've seen part of it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. The question that we came up with, or the thing we were trying to figure out, is like, why is there this impulse to design robots that look and behave like humans? Is it a response to, you know, the many things in the world that are typically kind of done by humans, or is it maybe tied into kind of our obsession, latent as it may be at times, to anthropomorphize everything?
Yeah,
so like our elbows, like are our arms really like well designed, and like why doesn't it look like the 1950s sort of, you know, vacuum cleaner hose where you could like bend in any place? Like it looks a lot like an elbow. Is that because it's just we're just so well designed, or is what's going on there?
Well, I don't actually know what's there we go. I don't actually know what's going on with that. I think, you know, there's obviously we have these sort of cultural tropes that we buy into, right? And cultural tropes perpetuated by, you know, mainstream science fiction films and whatnot. So I think there's a tendency to kind of follow into that mold. But also, you know, as you were saying, is human beings have just our
that walk looks like he's like sneaking out of the room after a one night stand. Like that's what that
yeah, it does. What I was seeing is like our pattern, our behaviors are very much focused on trying to anthropomorphize objects that we relate to, right, or relate with. If anything has any sort of intelligence or is any sort of manifestation in the physical world where you can communicate with something or whatever, we always try to anthropomorphize those things. We anthropomorphize our pets, right? Like when we talk to our dogs and cats, we treat them as
they're
people.
In strollers now.
Yeah, they're in strollers. We dress them up. We feed them food that looks like our food that's out of control, right? What I think people don't realize is that our pets do the same thing to us. Like your dog doesn't view you as a human. The dog just views you as a strange dog, right? And the cat just views you as a strange cat as well, right? So it's just that this is the natural human tendency to sort of anthropomorphize. So if we're thinking about embodied technology, right, especially embodied intelligence of some kind, some sort of embodied artificial intelligence, I think the tendency is like, oh, we're going to make this sort of, android or humanoid sort of robot, right, and kind of manifest things that way. But Rob, I think you're asking the questions like, is this elbow the right choice? Are these fingers the right sort of idea? But it's a really interesting book. I don't know if you guys know about Hans Moravec. I think he's a researcher at Carnegie Mellon. He's written a number of books about robotics, and he's thinking about what is the sort of ultimate form of a sort of the most flexible robot. And Rob, is exactly like you're saying. It's not about arms and fingers. It's about this set of almost like fractal-like appendages that extend out from a machine that can be reconfigured and manipulated in lots of different ways for like ultimate flexibility, right? That's when you start thinking about a very sophisticated type of machine and embodied intelligence from that perspective, like that's probably more realistic. So like, what are these Musk robots going to do? Like, what are they for? What's the context of their use? Are they meant to replace a human in some sort of human context? Like, I honestly don't know, right? And it is kind of strange.
That's a super interesting point you make, though, because if dogs, I don't know, what it's called when a dog anthropomorphizes, and sees another dog. But that suggests some sort of lizard brain thing, like something that we're not going to shed. It's so programmed deep in us that machine's going to have to keep reminding us that it's not a human.
Well, this is very like this idea of reminding that it's not a human that's a really good point, because when we start talking about some of the, like, we're seeing some really cool technologies emerge right now, right? With some of these chat technologies. So these LLMs, the interesting thing is like people anthropomorphize those as well. When you're interacting with an LLM, people interact with that model as if it's a human. Right. And there's all sorts of interesting and problematic behaviors that go along with that. Right. So, there's sort of perceiving that it's a human-like entity, right? Because you're having this very human-like dialogue. But there's also, sort of as you're having that dialogue in your perception of the model, there's also a sort of trust and emotional bond that sort of emerges. Like, we're humans, we have emotional connections to things, especially when we're having that sort of, very human-like interactive dialogue. Of course, you're going to invest emotion into this entity that you're interacting with. Of course, this entity has no emotion. It doesn't really know what emotion is. It doesn't even really know it's talking to you, right? We're not talking about sentient machines here. So you start to impart that sort of value into that system. And that's problematic because these systems aren't human and they're not necessarily trustworthy either. And they're problematic in different ways. And so that anthropomorphization, that's a word, can be very problematic when it comes to just usability and using these things to create layers of interface on tops of other technologies, right? It's really
huge issues with expectations, right? Because now we add this layer of things we expect from it, like kindness or empathy, wisdom, that
love, hate.
Yeah, it's not really there,
It's not there. No.
Yeah, we with our other Tim conversations, we were talking about like leading the witness. It's like very easy. There's a sort of intellectual component to like, can you be led, right? And some people are more easily led to say things they don't mean. And when it comes to ChatGPT, it's very easy to lead the witness. You can make it say all kinds of things just if you're clever enough on how to lead it to say it. But that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get it to crack, right? To say something it doesn't mean, which quite frankly is easy because it doesn't mean anything it says. We apply that meaning.
And this is one of the things, like, when we talk about the risks of, associated with artificial intelligence and machine learning, a lot of the discussion is around, bias in the data and, trying to reduce the, kind of hallucinations and other sort of problematic behaviors that can occur within the model, right? And you're dealing with the technicalities of models and understanding how they drift over time and how the sort of context of their use is changing, which also affects how the model operates. And so there's always this, when you're talking about machine learning, you're always talking about how do you sort of maintain and continuously operate that model and keep it updated. And that's just a technical challenge that you have to deal with. But for me, these ideas around sort of bias, like, those are problems and they're very significant problems that have to be overcome. But there's second order challenges that start to emerge as well with all of these technologies. And it goes beyond just things like bias. And what I'm talking about is, Rob, what you're saying is like the sort of, some people are able to be led, or they think something is true, or they perceive this model to be robust. So it can do things, it can lead you in certain ways, it can influence how you think, it can influence how you perceive certain facts and information. It can control a lot about how the information is flowing to you, and therefore impact your decision-making process, your autonomy, your agency, et cetera. And I think that's the real thing to be worried about, right? We're starting to see some really amazing, image generation technology, video generation technology, object generation technology. Really, we're starting to see this emergence of a lot of synthetic media, like synthetic media that's almost, you can't distinguish it from other things, from reality, right? It can't be distinguished from reality. In fact, it's kind of the manifestation of the idea of in postmodernism of hyper reality. Like artificial intelligence is kind of like the apotheosis of postmodernism from that sense. And so we're starting to create that hyper reality, but I don't think anybody really fully understands the impact to society and culture that's going to create. Like, you saw a little bit of that when, you start to see some digital tools emerge like Photoshop and some of the image editing technologies where you can start to like the truth of the photograph was suddenly degraded, very significantly. But that was very simplistic technology, with bitmap graphics. Now we're talking about synthesizing whole people, synthesizing dialogue, synthesizing data, synthesizing, entire, films from scratch, whatever the situation is. Think about how powerful that technology can be when we start looking at, the things that happened in, Facebook in 2016. And, Facebook's a very simple technology, but it was able to sort of influence, American politics in a very significant way. Just, a couple weird posts here, targeted information here, misinformation over here. Now imagine a fully synthetic media environment and what that can do. Like to a culture, to a society, to an individual, right?
Yeah,
it's
like the whole McLuhanism component, the global village thing going on here. That's like absolutely mind-boggling. That's like the singularity may not just be in the machines; it may be in the humans, right? Like the singularity is in us as again that whole global village idea, right? Like our community is just. It's just like this massive artificial virtual thing. It's not real people anymore. It's like pieces of interactions that
it's a network of hyper reality, right?
Right.
And then humans are kind of in the middle of that massive graph, right? We're nodes in that graph, but we're not the only nodes now. There's all this sort of synthetic information and some other media kind of coming in as well. Like it's a really interesting time, right?
Yeah.
It's like this is a turning point for the entire civilization. That's my perspective, right? This is a very significant moment in history.
Yeah, let's say you think like the components of a community are people. Could that be different? Could the raw components of what a community is end up just being experiences that make up your day, and that collection of experiences makes up your community, not actual people. And it's like this perception problem where you feel fulfilled at the end of the day, like a potato chip, you feel fulfilled at the end of the day, but there's like low nutritional value because there was something. You still feel full, but there was still something missing because it wasn't actual people. It was just
you're maybe missing an emotional component or some sort of other satisfactory aspect of a human, one-to-many human interaction, right? Yeah. I mean, we're social organisms, right? I mean, we're primates by default. We're social. Like we're some of the most social animals on the planet, right? And that's kind of how we evolved. So if you start to take away the actual social connection, Rob, I think that's what you're saying, right? If you start to pull that away, what happens? What is the nature of, what does that do to us?
Seems like there's also a space too, though, to where as an interface, conversation can recede enough into the background where there could be situations where technology is doing things for us, but we are taking very little notice of it. I guess that would require a lot of trust being put into it, and certain things would have to happen to get us there. But then you're in a situation where maybe you can improve the quality of the interactions that you have with the people in your life, in your community. It's probably kind of a lofty goal, but need a lot of design work to get there.
Yeah. It's kind of the car, like wherever you steer it and drive it, and wherever you choose to go is where you end up, not where the car took you. So you got in, you drove it somewhere, and if that destination was to go hang out with friends, then that made that car and that technology like, enriching for your life. If you choose to get in the car to just go watch a movie by yourself on the screen, then you used it to be alone.
Yeah. Well, when Photoshop came up, I think we were talking with Tim O'Reilly as well, like this idea that, someone could use Photoshop and insert a person into a scene that wasn't there, and they could do it at a level where you really wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
I don't know.
But there's something more unsettling, I suppose, about a machine being able to do that. Like if a machine did that and not a human, it creates a layer of discomfort. And then I suppose you also add in, like, if a machine's doing it, it can do it at scale. It's not going to take 6 hours that it would take a person to sit there and smooth all those edges.
Yeah, I mean, and we're also talking too about fidelity in other dimensions. Like, Photoshop is basically just kind of a two-dimensional experience, right? A two-dimensional impact. But, I think we understand that all images and things that we see are somewhat processed. But now, like, the discernibility between reality, what's real and what's false, like, starts to get much more complex, right? We start thinking about all the things that we see. We start thinking about all the media that we receive. You even think about, like, if you look at what's happening with like ChatGPT can be asked to be influential, right? It can understand aspects of your cultural perspective, right? Where you come from, what you believe, what you know. It can very simply target that through some very simple prompt engineering, right? And it's different with like a Photoshop. Like, Photoshop can convince you via images that something is true. And you can ask questions and we can test whether or not those images are real or not. But then when you have an entity that has these very human-like qualities telling you things, that's a very different type of experience, right? And, and if it speaks with a certain type of voice and a certain type of authority, with a certain level of nuance, and by the way, these LLMs can do that, right, very well. You can tell it to explain something as if you were a kindergartner or a college student, and it will do that. And so you think about that level of impact, right? How tailored that can get. It's powerful. I think it's more powerful than most people realize yet. Like what this is going to do.
I think there's another dimension of this that doesn't get talked about a lot, which is this idea, like, we have these senses, right? The sensory input data, our eyes, our smell, ears, and with each sense, we have like a different degree of certainty and confidence score in a sense, right? So when we see fire versus when we hear fire versus when we smell fire, like each sense has its own, like, I see fire, I have a higher confidence that there is fire than if I smell fire versus I hear fire. And then, of course, when you combine them together, that confidence even goes higher. I smell and I see fire. And when you look at sort of the McLuhan angle, which is like digital media is just another sense. It's just an extension of our senses, right? It's just another sense feeding data input. But you could also say that it also has its confidence score, right? And so if we see it online, right, we're piggybacking on the confidence of sight, right? Like, I saw the fire online. But there's also a chance that score just goes down, that we just don't regard it. It doesn't weigh as much into our sort of confidence level as it did before. And it says, like, now if I smell fire because like my neighbor's always barbecuing, right? So now if I smell fire, I don't believe it anymore, right? I don't, like, he's always barbecuing, like, but if I see fire, like, in my kitchen, so now seeing it online is just, it's like super low confidence. Like, it's just my neighbor barbecuing probably,
This kind of speaks to the idea of kind of media literacy and the level of sophistication people have with understanding what they're consuming and what's being delivered to them and how it's being delivered, right? As you were talking about, like, that fifth sense. And it's interesting because I've been thinking, like, all right, well, if you look at boomers versus Generation X, I would say probably Generation X understands a lot about the sort of fallacies inherent to like sort of digital media consumption and where that can be somewhat problematic. But not everybody in Gen X, right? If you're on the tech side, you definitely understand a lot of these issues. And then I get worried, like, does Gen Y, millennials definitely are much more sophisticated, I think, than Gen X in terms of understanding how to sort of navigate the digital space and understand the kind of reality that's emerging. Like they're very sort of sensitive to that. What's been interesting is, and I don't have data or anthro research around this yet, but I suspect that Gen Z is even more sophisticated, right? Like they're the ones who are on TikTok all the time. Like, they're never in Facebook, right? But they're doing all this stuff and they're, building things in Roblox and on TikTok, and they're in all these other environments. And when I talk to younger people, it's surprising. And when I mean younger people, I mean like younger than like 13, like, these 10-year-olds or 8-year-olds. You talk to them about what they're doing. They have this sort of inherent knowledge about what's bullshit and what's not. Like they kind of know, like, because they've been in the space so long. But I think there's hope for them in terms of being able to sort of traverse this space. But again, the landscape is about to get a lot more complex too. And I'm really curious to see how this sort of this emerging generation deals with all this and because they're the ones who have to figure it out. Like we're kind of at the end of our run, right? They're coming into the world, and they're coming into it. And we used to say digital natives back in the day, right, Rob? When we were thinking about types of users, this is beyond being digital native. This is a whole different level of sophistication in terms of use and understanding. And it's because they emerge into that environment, but they're also not entirely duped by it, right?
Yeah, there's also like some like what I don't know what you call it, like tooth fairy syndrome. You teach your kids that the tooth fairy exists. Everyone pretends it exists, and it's fun. It's fun to pretend it. Like we all just, kids know. There's that age. They know, but you're gonna keep this charade going on, right? And they're like, okay, like it's fine. I'll pretend it's real. Let's go with it. Like, why not? Does it have to? Like, do I have to get to the truth? Do I have to know the truth? Like, do I need the truth on everything? Like, it's okay. I like this idea of the tooth fairy, so I'm just gonna go with it. It doesn't matter what the truth is. It's my truth, and I'm gonna choose it. So I'm gonna pick my truth, and that's what it's gonna be, and that's all great until there are like real consequences, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And that's what we see. Like the tooth fairy is all great until like
until you got to hold an election.
Right. Yeah. I was gonna say the pandemic had everyone kind of
until you need a shot in your arm, right, for the pandemic or something, right? Yeah. Things are getting a little crazy, that's for sure.
Yeah. So I can't help but go like way back in time here, which is like you and I, you're leaving Kodak. Kodak's like there's like people that will listen to this like, what's Kodak?
Yeah. Exactly.
And I, you were there to kind of try to see if that could be resurrected, right? If they could stay relevant. And this is like, ironically, right, a bit of a Kodak moment for some companies now, the AI moment, right?
Yes, it definitely is.
And having a front seat, like as you're sort of like witnessing this, and you know what's happening, and everybody there knows what's happening. It's not like they're in the dark. They see it, it's happening, but they can't stop it. They can't. Like Kodak just keeps going on this spiral that's no matter who they bring in, you geniuses to come in and save the day. There's just no stopping this like trajectory of losing it. Is there anything you think that you learned from that, like seeing it again, that companies would be like, that anything could have stopped Kodak? Like, is there anything that could have, like, was that just it?
The Kodak, that's just an interesting story, and I think there's a cool article on LinkedIn from Ken Perolsky, who I think was an engineering leader at Kodak, who really outlined what killed Kodak. And I don't want to get into all the details, but it really comes down to the fact that Kodak's leadership really wanted to invest, continue to invest in the consumables market, which is all Kodak ever was selling paper and chemistry. It really had nothing to do with, film. Film drove the burning of paper and chemistry product, right? It's a razor blade business. And, there was a hardcore group of people who thought and knew that digital imaging was the future and was driving towards that, right? But they just couldn't get away from, the previous patterns. You have to think about it, the company is being run by chemical engineers, right? It's a bunch of chemists, chemical engineers kind of running this space, and people, or you could think of them also as like material scientists, right? They're thinking about how to use materials to make money, where then digital ink, like printer ink becomes the new, and toner becomes the new, developer fluid and paper and film and all that type of stuff. Meanwhile, we're talking about, well, how do you monetize a digital ecosystem of images, right? You've got eyeballs, you have it's literally like images on the web is a killer app, right? How can you why can you monetize that? And of course, shortly after I left, not shortly after I left Kodak, but, Kodak goes bankrupt. I left before they went bankrupt. And then, Instagram gets bought for $2 billion, which was more than Kodak's entire valuation at the time. It's kind of a crazy moment. But what I would say, if I were to map those learnings, Rob, back to kind of where we're at today with the emergence of, significant emergence of artificial intelligence over the past 10 years, is that there's going to be groups inside of these organizations who understand the implications of this, right? That are going to be fighting to change directions, but there's going to be the leadership, the previous, entrenched culture that's going to prevent that. And we're going to see that across all industries. Like there's going to be a sort of resistance to the models, but there's so much happening. There's so much momentum, and it's so transformative, and it's transformative everywhere in all the ways that I think a lot of organizations are going to get caught out. And we're starting to see a little bit of that now. Like everybody has to make that shift, that big jump. And of course, we've watched Microsoft do that over the past few months, and it's been spectacular, right? They understand the implications. And then now we're watching Google scramble. Like when I first interacted with some of the large language models and saw how they were working and what they could do, I was like, it's over for Google. Like it's over. Like they've just been officially completely disrupted. And it's really interesting to see how Microsoft was able to understand that level of disruption and react to it so effectively, right? It's just been fascinating. And I guarantee you there's, obviously Microsoft has their, R&D and investments in AI that they've been doing, and they're obviously keeping their finger on the pulse, but they've been moving aggressively. You can tell this isn't just something that just happened in the past couple of months. They've been preparing for this for years and making those moves. And so I think other organizations need to look at that as a model and say, hey, we need to react to this now and start thinking about these deeper implications, and think about the implications to the end state, because the technology is evolving so rapidly. Like I remember back in the late 90s and early 2000s, we used to talk about internet time. I don't know if you remember that. I was like, oh, we're on internet time when we do this. And it's like, oh, the pace is crazy and fast. AI time is at least 2 orders of magnitude faster than internet time. I mean, if you watch the papers come out, like the advancements in AI are increasing week by week, not year by year. It's within weeks. You'll see a paper come out where, they'll like NVIDIA is showing, some of those NURBS modeling. And you're just like, oh, this is mind blowing. Then the next week, another paper comes out where somebody else then took that to a whole other level of magnitude. And you're like, this is 1 week or 1 month between these two papers, and the advancement in the technology has been that significant. So you can't think about, like, people are like, well, how can we use ChatGPT? It's like, let's take a step back, because that is just the foundation. That's just the beginning. We're going to be taking this to some sort of end state that is almost unfathomable at this point. So you have to think beyond just what you see today, because it's powerful stuff.
Yeah, I was thinking like when mobile kind of hit, and we were dealing with pretty big brands at that time.
Yeah,
and I remember going in and these guys saying, hey, I need a mobile app. I got a budget like 10, 15K. That should be enough, right? And then of course they got what they paid for. and then these companies are like, oh, I guess mobile's not for us. We tried it, like didn't work, right?
Right.
And getting them to like pony up make a real go of it was like it took a lot of tail
I think people
spinning, right?
they had to understand the impact of mobile technology. I mean, this kind of goes back to the Kodak conversation, because I used to work on consumer electronics, and they were always worried about what they used to call feature phones. Like, feature phones had cameras, and cameras were a threat to their digital camera market. And, but one of the conversations was always like, well, are you going to carry two devices or one device? Which way are we going? So they started to invest in, Motorola's, cameras, and looking at, okay, this is kind of the direction of the future. I think when we saw mobile emerge, the idea was, well, why do I care about a phone, right? This is, and what is the impact of this thing? And I think that there's sort of this concept of the legacy concept of the telephone, and why is it important in this particular context, and why does my business need to have a presence here? But it was like, this isn't a telephone, people. We call it a phone. We never use it for, I don't know, you guys probably have never called people on your phone like I do. I don't call people. But this is an incredibly powerful mobile, ubiquitous mobile computing platform that is networked, right? Like, and is got a very powerful graphics engine and telecommunications engine associated with it. What is the possibilities of that emergent technology? Like, people, if you're just some business and you're operating in a certain way, you're not thinking at that level. But that's how you have to think about this stuff, is that this was a fundamentally transformative technology that has now, shifted how we work, think, interact with one another.
That was like first principles,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it feels like a continuation too of sort of the UX struggle of trying to treat things like a bolt-on when it really requires something much more holistic that affects an entire organization. The companies that do it right are often like the ones that are kind of built around that process, or the lucky ones, I suppose. Yeah, and then you have the companies that kind of like throw 10 grand at it and watch it fail, and then the companies that like see, like maybe someone understands how huge and holistic an undertaking it's going to be, and then they back away because of the scope of it. So yeah, it's hard to know. Like,
yeah, I mean, the level of, significant investment has to be made, like, in this space. And there's, of course, lots of different ways to do this. You can be at the ground level, developing your own technology and models, et cetera. You can be leveraging, the amazing thing now, like, now that we've got, foundation models, like, this is really powerful technology. It's, you could think about, previously this idea of what it would take to sort of deploy this technology or develop this technology. You need lots of data. You need very talented data scientists. You need the compute infrastructure to be able to process all this stuff. It's starting to shift a little bit, right? And all that, everything that I was speaking about before, that's billions of dollars of investment to create a chat GPT, right? Like, it's just to train it, right? Like, holy shit, like, the compute is massive. But with an LLM or foundation models, like these publicly available foundation models, it's like, you've got the starter kit, you get the Ferrari motor and the Ferrari chassis and all of that. You get the starter, and then you've got to just, figure out how to configure the chassis, the suspension, or whatever, the interior or whatever to go race it on the course. It's probably a very deeply flawed metaphor there, guys. But but you get all this stuff, and it's an accelerator, right? It's a massive accelerator. So the level of investment to move forward is much smaller. Now you've got a foundation model, and you've got all the APIs and SDKs associated with that, and then you can just pick up and run as a developer. It's not like it used to be. And I mean, like, last year, right? It's like it's already changed, and it's really interesting. And so, what are the implications of the sort of foundation model idea? What is that going to do, right? Now that it's kind of like empowering industry at a different level than it was being empowered before. And I think that's going to have some interesting implications too.
Yeah, there's kind of a moment, right? You just imagine because a lot of these companies are really in the asset, protection mode, right? They're not in the explore mode. They're in the exploit mode of, it's like when someone gains wealth and they go into like the wealth preservation stage, right? Not make too many
Bad choices.
speculative moves, right? And so the CEO gets told, like, you got to do something here. You got to take a risk. So he walks into the room with his engineers and he says, okay, who in here has a surefire idea on how we can leverage AI? And everyone looks at each other like, did you say surefire?
Yep.
And he's like, okay, I'll come back when you do. Right? Which is like, never.
Yeah.
Like, this is just moving too fast, right? By the time anyone is sure, the moment's gone.
It presents this exact scenario presents me with design challenges on a daily basis. Like, literally, like, this is my problem. It's like things are changing. You've got to adjust continuously. And so, yeah, I think you're right. I don't know, Rob, like maybe there's a, like if you're asking like, what's the surefire approach, or there's a business context in which people are asking that questions, there might even be models involved in that. Like you're asking the system now for advice on how the system is going to evolve. And if you start to think, these are the things that cause me a great deal of existential angst, right? Like you're now querying the machine about how to improve the machine. And then you're starting to get into the idea of like a von Neumann machine, right? Self-replicating machines, self-improving machines. I don't know if you guys read a lot of sci-fi, but that too is another very significant issue beyond just like, people were like, oh, we're going to become like slaves to the robots. It's like, no. The robots don't care about us. But if you give the robots unlimited resources and the ability to self-replicate, what happens at that point, right?
Yeah.
That can be a very dangerous situation too.
Yeah, we definitely lose ourselves potentially.
Not just ourselves. I mean, you can take it to an end state of all-consuming. You create a set of all-consuming robots that just continuously self-replicate. It's basically a cancer for the entire galaxy, right? They just will consume all matter and replicate till they can't replicate anymore.
A more potent cancer than humanity's proven to be, even, which is like, pretty impressive.
Well, that's what humans do. We make things.
I was listening to like Eckhart Tolle. He's like a German, he's kind of a spiritual teacher, but someone asked him if he thought that AI could ever gain consciousness or become spiritual. And his answer was interesting because he said that consciousness isn't, or in his view, it's not something that comes from within your mind. It's something that exists. It's a frequency that your mind is able to tap into. And so from that train of thought, he basically said, well, I mean, I suppose a complex enough machine, why wouldn't it be able to tap into consciousness if consciousness is just this frequency that's floating around in the world?
Yeah. The idea was like, there's consciousness, and then your brain is a conduit for consciousness to speak through you as a person, like versus consciousness exists in your brain. It's a compelling idea. I don't know how.
All right,
how scientific it is.
I'm just going to say that Eckhart Tolle does not know what he's talking about. But when we talk about consciousness, what we're really talking about is, and spirituality is related to consciousness in very concrete ways, right? I can go deep on this topic too, if you like. But really, when we talk about consciousness, we're talking about the default mode network of the brain, right? The default mode network of the brain is an interaction of different, biological systems and anatomy within the structure of your brain, right? And that's what creates the internal dialogue, the ability to think with language and create a sense of identity, and to also have the theory of mind in other individuals, right? You guys know about theory of mind. That has a lot to do with like how we understand sentience in AI systems as well. So our consciousness is a direct product of our biology, right? These silicon substrates do not share the biological substrate. It's a very different type of substrate. Could you train a model to be spiritual? Could you train a model like it's a model is a type of Turing machine, right? Can a model then fully simulate the biological structures of the human brain, and then also the effect of the default mode network, and then have sentience from that part? And then a lot of our spiritual experiences have to do with how the default mode network functions, whether you extinguish it, right? And then you have this sort of connection to the greater world or not. And so Can machines be spiritual in a human-like way? Probably not, unless we build a synthetic brain, with that technology. But could they be spiritual in a silicon way, in their own way, with a different type of spirituality? Maybe a spirituality we can't identify as humans, right? Maybe that's already happening, Rob. I don't fucking know.
Yeah.
We don't know.
I'm with you.
They're a black box. We don't know what's going on inside of them.
Yeah, I think. If you actually like break down what a neural net is and how it works, it's this concept of taking data and then anchoring it to something. Some data set of some kind. And so you're taking data and you're kind of and then you're just like anchoring it to some relative point, right? And kind of like when we dream, there's all this data, and then we, our dreams are essentially anchoring this like random data and trying to make sense of it to like real things that are familiar to us, right? And so a lot of like our ability to function without like analysis paralysis is this like idea of like anchoring data into like single points to say, oh, that's a person, and then everything that happens gets like categorized and anchored in that data set as person. And so neural nets are essentially the ability to synthesize data in a practical way, to make it practical, right? And is spirituality just nothing more than like just a large neural net, in the sense that it's like big data sets that are just anchoring to like, I got to make sense of this, so I'm going to anchor it to something I know, like whether it's anthropomorphize it, or like these are all just ways to like take data and try to make sense of it, right? With our experiences, right? From fMRI, so you imagine you're sitting in this fMRI and you look at, they show you 10,000 pictures in a row. And they're training the model, and then from there they can read your mind, essentially. So using image generation, they're like
paper.
That's crazy.
But this goes back to that when we're talking about the danger in the synthesis of media, in that if not only can it be nuanced, but it can understand things about you, right? Even understand potentially understand what you're thinking with the right technologies and the right inputs, right?
Right.
Like this is like, Rob, it's so scary. It's like this becomes the end of, like, when we start talking about the fMRI imaging and the interpretation of that, like it comes to the end of the lie. Like you can't lie to people because we always can see what the truth is.
Like that movie. What was that movie called?
Well, there's a book that
The
talks
Invention
about,
of the Lie or something.
Yeah, there's that.
Yeah,
that movie. And then there's I remember it was a science fiction book in the early 2000s that was all about, they created like a truth detector machine and what the impact of that was on society. If you can't get away with a lie anymore, what does that do? Which has got huge implications. But there's the fMRI, like that's a really fascinating thing, right? Using basically pixels, like an fMRI image is just a raster grid or a series of raster images, which are just, RGBs in a matrix, right? And it's using that to determine your thoughts. Like, let's just process that for a moment. But then there's some other topics that I'm really interested in too that are related, and that is like, there's that whole experiment with the like cetacean communication where they're capturing whale sounds, right? And they're trying to get a critical mass of data from the whales so that they can start to decode their communications, right? And so, we live in contact with a number of different species that are very sophisticated. Like a dog isn't the smartest thing in the world, but a dog knows about 200 words and can communicate things to you. Imagine like this future now where we can actually have dialogue. And I don't know if you guys have watched the YouTube videos where they create the little interfaces for the animals and they can click the button that says, I want food, or I want snuggles, or whatever. You could kind of take that to the next level. And so now all of our communications have opened up in lots of different ways. And I often wonder, is it like with mammalian brains and kind of communication and behaviors? I think this is very possible, but what else is it going to open up for us? What other data sets can we process to untangle, different strings of communication from? Like we know that funguses and forests and trees are intercommunicating and moving a lot of data. We know that, colonized insects can actually behave in very sophisticated ways. Like, what other sorts of interesting second or third order effects are going to come out of this technology that are going to just totally disrupt how we think about our ecosystems, our place in the world, et cetera, right? And again, maybe people just aren't even understanding that this is possible, but it is. It's literally, it's happening now, and
I know. Yeah. If my dog could talk, I'm pretty sure it'd never shut up. Like, I think I'd be that guy who finally couldn't hear, and then he got hearing, and he just took it out. He's like,
let's go for a walk. We should get some snacks. Hey, what are you doing right now?
Oh my gosh.
Maybe we can unlock the secrets of dolphin humor, because they seem to be laughing a lot, and their brains have so many more folds than ours. I bet they're got a whole
and they're communicating, and they're like these communications. Like, there's communication. We think about communication one specific way. That's very human. Other species communicate in other ways, right? We're going to be able to untap all of this. It's not just our speech or our thoughts. It's our body language. It's our facial expressions. It's the subtext of our speech as well as subtext of our all of this stuff. It starts to be unlocked by these very sophisticated models. They can parse that up and then process it.
Yeah. How limited do you think our words are, though? Like, when it comes to we're pretty imprecise, right? Like, that's why coding language exists, because precision of natural. It's not like nobody tried to code in natural language before. Like, from the beginning, this was a thing, but it's just not precise. There isn't the precision, there to actually pull it off. So like, you need that generative component where like something is going to fill in the blanks. Kind of like that reading your thoughts. Like, probably 60% of that image is going to be just generated, like just hallucination, right? And that's what's so scary is like, how would the person looking at that image know what part was hallucinated and what part actually, was
exactly.
So now it like sees it hallucinated, that you saw something, or you thought something that you didn't think. And, this was like the, conversations we've had several times now where like there's an irony in the AI regulation thought process here, which is like very minority report, which is like they're trying to regulate what hasn't happened yet. Like, there's a chance it's going to happen, and they're trying to regulate it now, which in itself is very funny because of it almost depicts Minority Report. Like, I don't know, let's ask the machine who's going to do it, and then let's arrest them now. Like, maybe that's what we should do. Maybe that's how we need to regulate AI is just feed it a model of who's going to break the law with AI, just go arrest them right now.
Well, that's the type of stuff that it's very meta, right? That's the kind of thing that we're talking about now. It's in
just read their thoughts.
Legislators, like, first of all, the legislators are dumb, right? They're not technical, and they operate within the political context. They don't know, right? And they can't legislate. But I don't know. Do we bring the machines into that equation as well? I know it's like, we could. Should we? I don't know. These are the big questions, right?
The systems that we have where we could create regulations tend to move far too slowly to probably be effective with technology just going to be moving this quickly.
I think it's not just I think the fundamental threat of AI, it's not just our legislation. Like, everything's going to get upended, Rob. Everything's getting upended. Like, every industry will get upended. Our entire, I don't know, it sounds like a little like I'm a doomsayer. I've got hope for humanity, but this will present challenges because it's going to disrupt how we work, how we think about our work, how we get things done, our relationships, the nature of our civilization. We talked about how we relate to the world. Those are fundamental disruptions that are going to change things. I mean, I think about, again, Gen Z. Their world is going to be very different than the world that the boomers and the Gen Xers have created up till now, right? It's going to be a very different sort of space. And what's going to happen to our concept of nation states and cultures, right? Like, I have a feeling even some of that's going to get disrupted. It could be very problematic for a considerable period of time. I'm not sure.
What's the mood in your circles? Like, is it fear? Is it
I think it's more on
excitement?
Like, I'm scared personally, and I know that in academic circles there's also a trepidation and some fear, and people who are who understand the powers of these technologies can see what the impact may be. And so it's kind of like, the climate scientists in the 80s talking about global warming. Like that's kind of where we're at today. But on the industry side, it's more about the enthusiasm. It's more about the power of the technology and what the technology can enable. And obviously, there's a lot of very positive things that can come from this, and a lot of accelerators for business, a lot of things that can improve the human condition, right? But there's I think the amount of risk. Like we don't even understand the risk. We understand the benefits because we can imagine those, but there's risks and challenges that we don't even perceive yet that could be fundamentally problematic to our civilization.
Yeah, a lot of the fear I'm seeing with folks in this space is the fear of the people that don't understand it. Doing something, villainizing the folks that are optimistic about it. There's kind of a point to like, you believe in something, you think it can create a, positive future. It's not 100%, it's less than 100%, but it's more than 50 or 60%. So you still have a little bit of doubt, and then you wonder like, is it worth being in the spotlight? Because for a lot of us in this space, like we've been able to operate a bit on the sidelines, a bit not in the spotlight, and now boom, spotlight is on, and it's not. I didn't expect to feel this under scrutiny and fear. You kind of running around excited about what this can do, preaching, and people looking at you like you're crazy, to then people looking at you like you're creating the next tool that's going to end the world, and you're going, whoa, like, is it worth it? Even if it's worth it in terms of you believe in the technology, is it worth it to be in that spotlight?
Yeah, that's an interesting topic and it's timely too, because that Christopher Nolan film about Robert Oppenheimer is about to come out, right?
Yeah.
And very much we're in that Manhattan Project moment, and
right.
I'm really curious to watch that and see how that's interpreted in film, right? It could be really interesting, but we're kind of at that point, Rob, and it's like, what are we doing? And there's people in the, if you're a player in the industry, if you're involved in this, I think everybody's asking themselves, what do we need to do? How do we need to be thinking about this? What are our responsibilities?
Yeah.
I think we kind of passed that Manhattan Project point as well. Like the bomb's already been dropped. The genie is out of the bottle. Like it's out. The genie's out of the bottle.
Right.
So it's not like what do we do now? And I think this is the ethicists, the people strategizing on the visibility and observability of these systems. I think people are diving into this head as fast as they can and trying to figure out solutions. But again, I'm just wondering if the pace of change is going to be too fast, or the impact is going to be like we're gonna focus on certain areas that we understand today, and we're gonna mitigate those risks. I think we're gonna mitigate them just fine, but I still think that there's other unknown hidden risks that are gonna emerge. That I'm not sure how we're gonna react to those.
Yeah, Rob and I feel like there should be more designers working on this stuff, just in general. Do you think there's a way to, and not just like visual design, like all the aspects, all the different disciplines that go into experience design, I think can have great impact as we start, trying to figure out how to move forward with AI. How do we get them involved? How do we attract them?
Yeah, well, there are designers dealing with this. I know there's a group that I interact with out of Amsterdam that's looking at design, specifically design topics with respect to AI, and specifically the challenges and risks associated with AI. So this is happening. There's research groups coming together, focusing on these topics. I think we talk about design. When we talk about design, we're talking about people, right? Like we design things for people. And I think people is the important part here. And so it's not just designers. I think let's bring in the psychologists, the sociologists, the anthropologists, everybody on the human side. Like we have, like right now, like AI is dominated by, the math people, the stats people, all the different flavors of data scientists, right? These are all people who live in that sort of math and engineering and science world, right? We need to bring in the people from the humanities side to understand like the more human aspects of this and to dive deep. Yeah, like the philosophers of the world, like how are they interpreting this? What are the implications? How do we want to think about the emergence of these technologies? Like that's where we need the help. So I think yes, design, but even expanding that even further to all of the sort of humanities, kind of bringing that to bear, because you sit around with a bunch of math nerds all day. They're not thinking about psychology. They're not thinking about sociological impact. They're not thinking about the emotional impact on the human. Like that's not what they're doing. I think some people are aware that those are issues that need to be addressed, but it's not kind of a focus from that perspective. But I think you're right, Josh. You got to bring that to bear, because this is human civilization we're talking about.
Yeah. It's like bringing that design mindset, to bear in other industries, because I think as we learned from UX Magazine, which branched out from like a core audience of hardcore experience designers to like now kind of everyone has a vested interest in how things are designed.
They're the minority in a way. Yeah, I think a lot of us that have been doing this a long time realize that UX is not a profession. It's like a minor. You're a product manager. You're a manager. You're a entrepreneur with a minor in UX, and that helps you do your job better. But like as far as like UX as an exclusive like career and profession, it's almost like learning a second language. In itself, there are a few jobs for translators, and the rest it just helps you as a negotiator or as a politician or whatever.
I mean, what is thinking about UX and designing UX is really about the application of common sense and thinking about the user and what they're trying to do, right? There's not some special magic involved. Execution of beautiful and well done UX and interfaces that go along with that. And like there's skills and things that are associated with that, but the core problem solving, right, it's always been blurry from a discipline perspective, like blurry edges. It's a gradient. And you guys have all seen the diagrams, right? It overlaps into all of these different spaces. And the design mindset is a framework in which you use the lens in which you try to solve some of those problems. But it's not the only lens, right? And user experience, it's just it's a way to understand things, right? It's a way to think. And you don't have to be a designer to do that. You just have to understand the lens. Yeah. And once you understand it, then you can never get away from it. You're thinking about people, you're thinking about what they're doing, you're thinking about how they're thinking and feeling and, what they want to accomplish, all those types of things.
Yeah. And so much of this is just about good taste, right? I mean, whether you can design, whether you can't design, just knowing what's good and what's not good, right?
I like that Rick Rubin quote, like someone asked him, like, what is your job, basically? And he's like, well, I believe very highly in my own taste, and I'm very good at articulating it to people in moments when they can use it. Like that. That's what I do.
I think when we talk about designers, it often comes down to taste. When we talk about user experience and the performance of a product, that is measurable, right? That there is science that can be applied to that, but at the same time, you have to make these experiences desirable too. Like even the most banal enterprise experience needs to have that. Rob, we built a business on this, right? Yeah. It has to have that dimension. And so that's where some of the taste making comes in and, all that type of stuff. And that's, where designers designers create culture. That's how I think about it. Either material culture, if you're an industrial designer, visual culture, if you're a graphic designer or artist, the digital culture, if you're a more traditional UX designer, like we're the ones making the things in the world that populate our space and create our experiences, right? And so, you gotta be a little bit of a taste maker, which just means, taking risks and understanding where things are going and understanding what's possible.
Yeah. Well, that's a big piece of it, right? Like as a designer, kind of like science fiction authors, they tend to have the ability to kind of see things through. They can look at something they're building and start imagining how it might look 10 steps down. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an important skill set to bring right now in particular.
Extrapolation and implications and impact. Yeah, that's I mean, when I'm thinking about new tech, that we were just talking about mobile phones, like I'm looking at a phone because back in the day, I was thinking about, this is back when we used to talk about UbiComp, ubiquitous computing, right? That was like the future, ubiquitous computing and ambient intelligence, which we live in that world today, but we don't use those terms at all, right? Like it's just, I've got my Alexa over here, I've got my mobile phone, I got my laptop, I've got my Garmin device, my watch, it's a ubiquitous computing environment now. And I can interact with these systems as casually as I want, right? So we're thinking about it from those terms, thinking about it at a very base level. And so that's how you have to think about, what do I see today, but what does that imply for tomorrow and the day after that, and so forth, right? Because the way that humans work is we make a thing and then we make it better, and then we make it better again, and we don't ever stop. That's why we have artificial intelligence now, right?
Yeah. And if we make it too much better too quickly, everyone freaks out. And
yeah, and we do that. We do that. We've done this. And the funny thing is, Rob, you look back to antiquity, to classical, classical civilization. They knew these ideas. They understood this, right? Like this is the myth of Pandora. Right? Prometheus, right? This is the Pandora moment, the Promethean moment all over again. We've been warned about this by our ancestors. They said, don't do stupid shit. Pay attention to what you're doing, or there'll be problems, and think about things before you act and do whatever, right? Yeah. They warned us, but we always forget.
Somehow stupid shit always feels new.
Yeah. Well, that's a great way to wrap it up, huh, guys?
Yeah. Somehow stupid shit always feels new.
Yeah.
Right on.
Well, thanks, Tim. We'd love to continue the conversation again sometime.
Yeah, you guys, this is awesome. Really I can do this all day, as you can tell. Right?
Yes.
All right. And I'm happy to contribute at any point. If you guys want to ping me again, I love it. Yeah.
Awesome.
And I've got other folks like me too, so just let me know.
Cool.
Happy to do more.
This is great.
Awesome. All right, thanks again for hanging out with us right here on Invisible Machines. Thank you, as always, to the team at UX Magazine, especially Kate Timchenko, the marketing team at OneReach AI, Elias Parker in particular work very hard to make this podcast great, as does Michael Litvinoff, our video editor. Please subscribe to UX Magazine wherever you get your podcasts so that you can hear new episodes as soon as they come out. If you want to watch new episodes, and I recommend you do, the video feeds are really pretty amazing, follow the Invisible Machines YouTube channel. And I think that's all I have for you this week. So let's go ahead and look forward to next week when we will connect again right here on Invisible Machines.